Hello, good evening, and welcome. We're in Scotland. I'm David Frost. We have broken from our traditional format of having a studio audience due to the staggering price of insurance the network demanded for tonight's guest. So it is simply the two of us and you at home. Please welcome a gentleman unable to join us in New York or London due to a variety of international warrants and bounties. Mr. James McCullum the 24th. Now, as head of Mars, the Military Armament Research Syndicate, he is the leading supplier of weaponry throughout the world. However, he is also known by another name, one that has imposed his will across generations and nations. Destro, international terrorist and Scottish nobleman.
Good evening, David.
Time magazine recently, in their November 1987 issue, described you as, and I'm quoting here, a scowling visage draped in leather and chrome, wanting to burn the world and rule over the smoldering embers. Now, I'm not saying that. Time magazine said that, do you see? Is that descriptor that you would accept?
Well, of course not, David. To begin with, my helm is constructed of beryllium steel, not chrome, as that author erroneously put it. As to my penchant for leather, did you know that Einstein wore identical suits every day so that he wasted no brain power on vanity? When you find a look that suits you, go with it, I say.
You seem to have overlooked the part about burning the world.
Ha! The world has always been on fire. There is no profit to be had in rubble. One must delicately balance constant turmoil like a chess game. My ancestors, the Destros of old, faced persecution and incarceration for doing their job all too well. War is eternal. War is inevitable. War requires weapons. War requires Destro.
But the world, and I'm speaking in the broadest of terms here, hasn't been at war since 1945. Skirmishes and conflicts have happened, of course, but since 1982, it seems as if there has been a tremendous increase in the number of global terror events. Your involvement in this escalation of conflict cannot be denied. Whether it's weather domination, global blackouts, or a giant produce falling from the sky.
I take issue with your parsing of the word war here, David. Vietnam was certainly a war.
It was a conflict, James.
Ha! Tell that to our Vietnamese brothers. Tell that to our Korean brothers. You can't, can you? Because they're dead. War does not wait for the US Congress to agree upon its nature. War is everywhere there is ambition. And Destro has never been short of ambition. In whatever form it assumes, be it the North Vietnamese or even Cobra.
Since you've brought up Cobra, have you stopped arming the world's leading terrorist organization?
Well, since the original Laird Destro was shackled and placed in an iron mask, Destros have made it a point of pride to keep the nature of our clientele a secret. Mars whispers no name into the wind, and we certainly don't share it with an English presenter on live TV.
But surely you cannot deny the evidence. You've been photographed alongside Cobra, Commander. You yourself have led multiple assaults on the G.I. Joe team. You are so prominent in the Cobra hierarchy that the general public actually believes you lead it. There's even an action figure of you, and you've been drawn into their monthly comic books.
Propaganda and hearsay, David. One of the advantages of wearing my mask is that I have the benefit of plausible deniability. Legally speaking, anyone could be wearing that mask.
I'm holding a copy of the G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero comic book, issue 14. The man on the cover bears a stunning resemblance to yourself. You deny this is you?
That's a drawing of a man on a comic book. A drawing.
They even have the detail of your chest medallion.
I can't control the draftsmanship of every imaginative artist out there. Here, let me take a closer look. See now, Herb Trimpey, eh? Quite talented, this Trimpey. Hey, darling, make a note to send Mr. Trimpy a bouquet for his wonderful rendition of me, as fanciful as it may be. No, an actual bouquet. No bombs, nothing like that. Maybe an edible arrangement, something nice. Ask Anastasia. She's good with these things. Apologies, David. Where were we?
I hope that's not a veiled threat against Mr. Trimpy.
On the contrary, I admire his work quite a bit. I think a Trimpy portrait would hang well here in the silent castle. I have just the throne room for it, assuming Cobra Commander hasn't already adorned it with his gaudy gold lame style.
Now that you've once again mentioned Cobra Commander, you've armed Cobra for a number of years. Don't deny it, the Hiss tank is your very recognizable design.
If I recall correctly, in the United States of America, home to your much-lauded G.I. Joe team, gun manufacturers are exempt from any responsibility related to firearm incidents. Even as said events escalate, the likes of Smith & Wesson, Remington, and other competitors of mine are untouched and in fact celebrated, are they not?
You're comparing hunting rifles to Hiss tanks.
Lasers don't kill people, and not just because of poor aim. People kill people with lasers.
Now, it seems to be an easy scapegoat for your near-record profits. Meanwhile, the G.I. Joe team is well known for their outreach programs to children, teaching them about downed power lines, fire safety, and pork chop sandwiches.
Blowtorch certainly will get my vote for the Nobel Prize.
Now, how long have you known Cobra Commander?
I know the man you refer to as Cobra Commander since the late 1970s. There have been so many scurrilous rumours about me that I'm determined to cement my legacy, which is why I've chronicled it here.
Oh, that's right. Your biography, Beryllium Heart, it arrives in bookstores this month.
Right.
I have read the advanced copy, and I do need to ask you, should this be filed under biography or fiction?
Oh dear, one man's truth is another man's fake news, eh? I come to you today with an open mind and bare chest. If you're going to deny me the respect of belief, then perhaps this interview should end prematurely.
No, of course not. I am a straight shooter here, and I will not shy from confrontation when I perceive there to be a need. However, I affirm your honesty and credibility, and any indication on my part that I do not believe you, I apologize profusely. Now, moving on. Chapter 1 of your book focuses on the commander and is titled The Cobra That Got Away.
Yeah, it was around 1978. I was in the States and in need of a car. So I found myself at one particular used car dealership in a nice little town called Springfield.
Hold on. We're to believe that you, Lad Destro, were buying a used car?
Well, new cars lose 80% of their value once you drive them off the lot. There's no shame in a gently used vehicle. It's economically sound. Plus, there was a global gas crisis. I may be surrounded by opulence, but I'm not a spendthrift. Now, continuing. I was purchasing a new car.
New to you.
And the salesman was going on and on about how much the government was screwing him over. A recent victim of some tax burden myself, I lent a sympathetic ear. I have to say, his arguments had some merit.
And of course, this salesman would turn out to be a nascent Cobra Commander.
Well, I didn't call him that, of course.
Actually, in the book, you call him Fred.
Well, that's his name.
Wait, you're saying right now, live on television, that Cobra Commander's real name is Fred?
Of course it is. Why else would you think he named all the Crimson Guardsmen Fred? Vanity, thy name is Fred.
That's amazing. What a scoop. You heard it here first, live on the BBC. Cobra Commander's first name is Fred. I have to say, that is quite underwhelming.
That's why I suggested Commander.
So, you named Cobra?
Well, no. The organisation that would eventually become Cobra was loosely being formed by then. He had gone from community to community, stirring up nascent hostilities that were fostered by the oppressive United States government. After the hit job that US lawmakers made on your friend Mr. Nixon, Good Americans were fed up. They wanted a straight shooter, a man who said it like it was and didn't represent the establishment. Jimmy Carter was a milksop, and America was a couple of years away from the strong authoritarian hand of Reagan, so there was an opening for an entrepreneur like Fred. All he needed was good branding, and that's where I stepped in.
Hitler had Hugo Boss. Fred had Destro.
An apt, if brazenly antagonistic comparison. He was floundering for his next move. I stressed that if his movement was going to survive and thrive, he needed to strike fast, then retreat, like a snake. He looked around the car lot and his eye settled on a Shelby Cobra. Thus, Cobra was born.
Imagine, had he been a Pinto dealer.
I would never have armed a group named after a legume. McCullens have standards, you know.
He seems to have taken the second half of your suggestion to heart.
That's the common misconception that many of you and your brethren in the press share. A view fostered by the G.I. Joe team as propaganda that Cobra Commander retreats due to cowardice or failure. Not the case at all. It's a well-worn battle tactic. Hit and run. One used by insurgents all over the globe in all manners. It's only that his distinctive voice makes it seem more shrill than a discreet order of withdrawal.
Prior to this agreement, Mars was a respectable, legitimate business that dealt directly with legitimate governments. Why the pivot to terrorism?
See what you just did there? You just capital T'd terrorism. Cobra is a loose organisation of right-thinking individuals who stand up to an authoritarian government. They are not state-sponsored terrorists. They are not driven by ancient religious tomfoolery. They're freedom fighters, fighting against an oppressive collection of deeply embedded members of the United States government. Sorry about that.
Like some kind of deep state, if you would.
Exactly, yes. That's a great way to put it, actually, David. There you go. Cobra fights against the deep state and the oppression that the governments of the world bring to our daily lives.
Surely, your life is not oppressed. We sit here in your castle, surrounded by your opulence and your splendor. How are you, Destro, being oppressed?
Correct. We sit here in Scotland. I'm not free to enter London or New York. I live a man confined, a man guilty by association for trying to make a living for my family. I'm a simple man with simple means. And a beryllium mask.
But your travel restrictions are due to your involvement in several high-profile attacks upon the United States.
Poppycock.
During what has come to be known as the rise of Serpenter, you were clearly seen atop a Cobra stun, leading troops upon the streets of Washington, D.C. You and your cohorts in Cobra were trying to overthrow the United States government through an armed insurrection.
David, may I remind you, I'm not admitting that was me behind the mask. However, I and my confederates in the loose organisation known as Cobra were visiting DC to ensure a free and fair election. There were too many rumours swirling around Reagan's re-election in 1984. In fact, I knew of many, many cases of voter fraud, specifically surrounding the Arbco voting machines, allegations that the US was ignoring. It was, and has always been, our assertion that LaRouche was denied votes.
Yeah, of course, referring to Lyndon LaRouche, independent candidate from Virginia.
Aye.
He garnered 79,000 votes.
An impressive display.
Of 93 million votes cast.
I love an underdog.
In addition to this, you invaded Washington on September 19th, 1986, just last year.
Yes.
Mr. Reagan's re-election was November 6th, 1984.
It took time to gather the evidence. May I add, evidence that the mainstream media, such as yourself and that despicable Hector Ramirez, ignored. Justice delayed is justice denied.
And so your answer was to storm the Capitol with stun tanks, night ravens, vipers, and battle android troopers.
A blade sheathed is a blade dulled. When a government denies a good man his earned votes, There is no bigger crime. Mark my words, one day you'll see this happen again.
Really? Who really think this scheme of yours would work?
In time. The problem here was that Serpentor approached this entirely as a military exercise. I understood his thinking. He was freshly birthed, literally born yesterday. His zeal for victory was hard to control. In fact, if not for supply chain issues, he'd have been successful. Notice that was a failing that also afflicted Napoleon, an integral part of Serpentor's DNA. I believe in the long game, David. I believe a regime change like this takes time. Years. Decades even. It begins with the minds of the people. Then we move in with like-minded senators and representatives, then judges, and then, only then, will Cobra strike.
Moving on, Chapter 3 of your book details the inner workings of Cobra High Command. The meetings you describe seem more like Shakespearean drama. Were there really that many grapes and goblets?
Never underestimate the power of a thrown chalice. The biggest problem we faced was getting the wine stains out of our clothing. Aye, Storm Shadow was especially perturbed by this. There wasn't many meetings before he started standing behind Cobra Commander. Here's a scoop for your viewers. Storm Shadow first added the Cobra insignia to his chest to cover up a wine stain. That's absolutely true! I'll tell you. Even Toileteel, Cobra's world-class cleaning women, could not get Merlot out of a white ninja uniform. In fact, it was then that Tommy started standing behind the wine-tossing commander. That's why people started to think he was the bodyguard.
So Storm Shadow wasn't the commander's bodyguard?
He's a ninja. Ninjas live in the shadows and assassinate targets. Bodyguards stand next to their principal to act as a deterrent and project force. Storm Shadow was trained in the arts of stealth and subterfuge. He was no bodyguard. Storm Shadow was just saving on his dry cleaning bills.
Fascinating. Now, it was during your time with the Cobra High Command where you reconnected with Anastasia de Cobra.
Ah, the lovely Baroness.
First impression.
Oh, my heart leapt from my chest. In fact, you see my family crest medallion there? This represents my familial strength, but also my heart. It belongs to my dear Baroness, and is hers to snatch away at a moment's notice.
And according to your book, Beryllium Heart, available at B. Dalton bookstores nationwide, she rebuffed your advances initially.
A love worth fighting for is the only love that matters, David. I would go to the ends of the earth for my Baroness.
And she feels the same?
Well, I can see the sun. The sun does not have to see me.
Let's go back to the first time you put on the mask. How did that feel?
Electric. Powerful. Cold.
Elaborate.
It was literally quite cold. The Scottish Highlands can get a bit chilly. Cold metal meets flesh. Ooh.
Your father was a Destro before you. He stewarded the family business throughout the Vietnam conflict. I mean Vietnam War.
Aye.
Reflect upon your father for me.
A limited man with small vision, but a great capacity for love. He was content with Mars, supplying only democratic regimes, governments that in his eyes fought for human rights.
And you disagreed with this?
Not so much disagreed, but I was of a different mind on it. I perceive that when a force such as a Destro gets personally involved in a conflict, the scales have been tipped. Be it geopolitical fights or a game at risk, a Destro will win no matter what the cause. My father refused to, as he put it, enable bad men. What he didn't see, and that's where his limited vision came into play, is that once a subject is observed, you have intervened. The who and the why is insignificant. So if I'm going to be involved, and I was going to be involved, let's do so in order to change the world.
And he disagreed.
A great man, but we did not see eye to eye on this.
Your book touches upon the transition resulting in your assuming control of Mars, but never conclusively tells the tale. Rumors have long swirled that you were involved in your father's premature death. That when his body was found on the grounds of Castle Destro, you ordered no autopsy and had his remains cremated almost immediately.
Rumours are like the commander's wine. Splashed around long enough, it stains everyone in the room. Listen, Frost. My father's death was ruled natural. Natural for a McCullen. Lead poisoning. You wear a lead mask for 30 years, you're asking for trouble, okay?
That's why yours is beryllium.
I learn and I adapt. I am a survivor.
That's the thing. You've survived many regime changes within Cobra. To what do you attribute your longevity within an organization known for yearly turnover and availability of characters?
Distance. Arm's length projection of strength. Sure, there have been times that I've had to step in and run things, but you'll notice that at no time was I a commander or an emperor. I was a steward. I stepped in to move Cobra into their next stage of evolution, to become profitable, profit domination. That is my driving force.
And profit they did. When you were affiliated with Cobra, they saw record growth and constant expansion. But at the same time, you were also building out your own private army, the Iron Grenadiers.
My own personal security force. Details matter, especially to law enforcement.
It's long been rumored that Scrap Iron, an explosive mercenary who was recruited to Cobra via your connections, was an early lieutenant in your Grenadiers.
I can confirm that. He helped me work out some details on my wrist rocket missile systems. Quite a knack for rocketry, that one. So much so, I approached him to be an emissary.
Yes, there have been many personal commitments and complications within Cobra beyond the initial engagements. Major Blood, for example, was rumored to have, at one time, been brought in to assassinate you. I hope that's not a touchy subject.
I'm still sitting here, am I not? The incident you mentioned was a sobering moment for me, early in my affiliation with Cobra. I would admit my initial zeal to be involved, to be on the front lines, might have gotten the better of me. But when I saw the damage, the trauma that was inflicted upon my dear Baroness, as a result of thwarting Blood's clumsy attempt, it set right my mind. It brought my vision into sharp focus, and I have never looked back.
Back to Anastasia. Do you ever foresee settling down with her and removing yourself from the high-stakes world of global brinksmanship?
Our dreams and visions are our own, thank you very much, and we keep our own counsel on that. However, I do foresee a day where we retire, raise a family. Oh, and nothing would make me happier.
What exactly is her role in Cobra? I'm not asking you to implicate her in any crime, of course so. But she also seems to run the intelligence side of Cobra and often participate firsthand in many of their more immersive missions. Don't you worry for her safety, both physically and legally?
Her position in Cobra has always been one of her own making. Where I was primarily involved with providing weaponry, she was involved in planning, mission execution, subterfuge, the list goes on. They say behind every good man is a good woman. In the case of Cobra, behind every vainglorious popinjay is a European queen. I'm very, very proud of my bonny lass.
Now, it may come to the surprise of some viewers that you've been known to help the Joes in the past. Most notably, you provided support to them in the form of evidence against the U.S. government when a cabal of military leaders were trying to shut down the G.I. Joe team.
Aye, that I did.
But why?
If my motives are unclear to you, then I pity your bank account. Money, Mr. Frost, pure profit. What's better for the business of the arms supplier than a never-ending battle? If the Joes go away, then Cobra needs less equipment. Did you know, every time a rattler gets shot down, a young Scotsman's student debts are paid off?
Imagine that. A government paying for student debt. Now that is a lot of educated Scots.
Literal golden parachutes, David.
So you prolonged the war by arming your enemy.
Not my enemy. Cobra's enemy. They were simply pieces on my chessboard, as was Cobra.
Were you ever tempted to sabotage Cobra vehicles to further their reliance upon you?
Such as built-in obsolescence?
That's one way of putting it, yes.
No. Cobra Commander provided enough incompetence on his own. He didn't need my weaponry as an excuse. They still use my basic HISS design. If that's not a selling point for Mars Industries, I don't know what is. However, like any good baker, I do like to save the best recipes for myself.
Speaking of the US military, Earlier you spoke of President Reagan. Your name came up prominently during the Iran-Contra investigation. Specifically, Oliver North named Mars Industries as the supplier of weaponry to Iran, in which those funds were then used to support the Contras, a Nicaraguan rebel group. Viewers, of course, are surely aware of this as one of the most pressing controversies of the Reagan administration, one which seems to this day to have escaped any culpability for.
You, of all people, should see the parallels there with your most infamous guest, Mr. Nixon. It seems that the Republican Party learned a lesson in the 10 years since Watergate and no longer record themselves committing crimes.
You're saying that, contrary to congressional findings, President Ronald Reagan knew about the Guns for Money scandal?
Two possibilities exist. That the most powerful man in the world directed a multi-million-dollar hostage arms money coup scheme that happened entirely on his watch, or that the most powerful man in the world was kept entirely in the dark on the subject by his second-in-command, a man who formerly led the Central Intelligence Agency, and would be in a prime position to arrange such a transfer of goods without the president's knowledge.
Wild accusations here. Destro, you're now talking about the Vice President of the United States, and someone who many pundits predict will win the election next year.
Presidents have unique perspectives on the law and legality. One such man once sat where I am now and said, "When the president does it, that means it's not illegal." I think you'll find this is a perspective which will haunt the Americans in years to come.
So you admit to sending arms to the Iranians?
The West's pearl-clutching of right and wrong was of no concern to me, only good customer service.
Now, here's a photo of you and the Ayatollah Khomeini upon the first delivery of the Hawk and Tow missiles.
The naming irony was not lost on me.
At any point, did you consider stepping forward and offering your testimony to the US government?
And reveal what? All that I have ever confirmed and what we are now discussing was made public during those congressional hearings. That's the extent of knowledge that will pass these metal lips.
There's no guilt on your side, no element of remorse that can help put the minds of Americans at ease by revealing what you know about this operation? Many people in America feel that President Reagan not only lied about his participation, but one day his successor will likely issue pardons, allowing the culprits to forever elude justice.
My sense of honour stops on the battlefield, Mr. Frost. If the people of America want me to bare my chest and bleat to the world all my secrets, if they want me to interfere with the politics of their own elected leaders, ones that they themselves can remove from office if they so judge, I won't do that. With the singular exception of my devotion to Mr. LaRouche, of course. Destro never kneels and apologises even less.
And yet, back to your participation in the aforementioned assault on Congress, surely you were more than just an innocent arms supplier, as you claimed to be with Iran.
I am an innovator. I am a futurist. My job in this planet is to bring war to such a point it becomes commonplace. That's what I do, Mr. Frost. That's what I'm great at.
But what I'm really saying, in addition to untrue statements, couldn't you say that you did some covering up? Now, we're not talking legalistically, but there were a series of times when maybe overwhelmed by your loyalties or whatever else, that you behaved partially protecting your friends, your baroness, or maybe yourself as part of a terrorist organization at times?
No, Again, I respectfully will not quibble with you about the use of the terms terrorism. However, before using that term, I think it's very important for me to make clear what I did not do and what I did do. And then I will answer your questions quite directly. I did not, in the first place, commit the crime of terrorism with Serpenter, because I did not have the motive required for the commission of that crime.
We've had our discussions on that. The lawyers certainly will have theirs as well.
Serpenter was in charge of that operation. Serpenter had the motive of overthrowing the US government. My motive was profit, pure and simple. Now what does that mean? Are you wanting me to say that I participated in an illegal attack on the US government? Well, no.
Those were Cobra troops.
Exactly, Cobra troops, acting under the banner of Cobra. I was an unwilling bystander, there to monitor the usage of my creations.
Your lineage, your family name, has straddled the line of global conflicts, an impactful neutral force. Now, you've tipped that balance. You've crossed that line.
Oh, here we go.
Have you not thrown 400 years of Destro ideals into the rubbish? Don't you owe, at least to your own lineage, an apology?
You know, David, after a recent dust-up, I sat here in this very room, surrounded by my confidants. The Baroness. Oh, the Baroness. Volter, Billy, Darklawn, bless him. He was shaking, sobbing, and I get it. I just can't stand to see somebody else cry, and that ended it for me. I started to cry. The tears, David, they streaked in my mask. I pushed my chair back, and then I blurted it out and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just hope I haven't let you all down. Oh, I'm sorry, it's all coming back. But anyway, that said it all, you see. I had let them down, my friends, my country, but most of all, my ancestors. All the Destros that came before me, that stood for something in the face of unmitigated persecution. I let down the country of Scotland and the dreams of all those young Scots out there that ought to get into arms dealing for the right reasons, the proper reasons, but now think that dealing weapons is all too corrupt and the rest. It's just no right. Most of all, I let down an opportunity that I would have had years and years of great projects, selling arms to both sides of conflicts that would fuel programmes for building lasting peace, which has been my dream, you know. I let my ancestors down, and I have to carry that burden with me for the rest of my life. My days of profiting off the US military are over. I will never again have the opportunity to take hard-won American tax dollars and convert that into his tanks. Maybe I can advise my cousin Darklawn from time to time. And so, I can only say in answer to your question, I made so many bad judgments. The worst one, a mistake of the heart rather than of the head. A man in my position, he's got to have heart, but his head must always rule that heart.
And line your pocketbook, such as your biography available at Walden Books in a shopping mall near you.
Thank you.
Already projected to be a bestseller, it has optioned the live action rights.
Certainly a pittance compared to the world of international arms dealing, but yes, the idea of seeing a live action film chronicling the rise of Cobra sounds rather fantastic.
Does it, though?
Does it what?
Really sound fantastic.
Well, assuming they do it right. Stick to the canon. Don't make any ridiculous Hollywood changes, like a see-through mask for Cobra Commander, or making him Anastasia's brother.
Imagine that. Cobra Commander and the Baroness being siblings.
Oh, God.
It'd be like making the Baroness American and not Eurotrash. I mean, European.
Lips on snake eyes.
A vow of silence instead of damaging his vocal cords.
Robotic bodysuits.
Why would you possibly make those decisions?
It's just bloody
If
ridiculous.
anyone's hearing this and you think those are good ideas, stop what you're doing and quit your jobs immediately.
Batteries not included.
I mean, so stupid.
Oh, my
Just
goodness
so
me.
stupid, as if they don't understand the nature of the vehicles.
I mean, if they'd only just come and spoke to me, I could have been a very helpful, useful consultant.
You
on
could
their
have
production.
done so much consulting on
I'd
that
have
film.
a very modest fee, of course.
Of course. Everyone's got to wet their beak, or shall we say, wet their beryllium beak. Destro, I thank you for your candor and time this evening. I believe you've reached both the hearts and the minds of my viewers around the globe.
David, your professionalism is only exceeded by your manners. Thank you for being a guest in my humble home this evening.
And so, we sign off with James McCullen Destro, arms dealer, family man, human. Good night.
You've been listening to Frost Destro, a Joe on Joe theater production. Destro was menacingly portrayed by the talented Scot Peacock. Written and produced by Joe Slepski, based lovingly on legendary interviews conducted by top British presenter David Frost. Mr. Frost conducted thousands of interviews, giving us all tremendous insight into the minds of an incredibly diverse cast of 20th century icons. I recommend you watch his interviews on YouTube or wherever you may find them, primarily his groundbreaking interview with former President Richard Nixon, most famously dramatized in the film Frost-Nixon by Ron Howard. It is a fascinating exploration of themes that resonate even today. Thanks for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Joe and Joe podcast, leave a review if you're inclined, and say hi at Joe on Joe Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Joe and Joe is always sponsored by the Movies in a Meal podcast. You give them a shout out too. And if you want to reach me, you can reach me at joeonjoepod@gmail.com. Finally, thanks to Hooded Cobra Commander 788 for inviting Joe and Joe to participate yet again in Cobra Convergence, a month-long celebration of all things Cobra. Cobra Convergence unites fan podcasts and video channels under one banner, the banner of Cobra Convergence. It is a great place for you to discover new G.I. Joe fancasts and check in on old friends too. And now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.